Okay, so for this talk, I'll just discuss how to conduct the review of related work. And the first part will actually put things in context first. If you understand what your final year project is about and what it is for, I hope that it will help you to position yourself and to write the RRW and the rest of your proposal and final document better. Okay. So the first part will be what your final year project is. For EEE, it's some degree programs, they have what they call as a minor thesis. In some institutions overseas, they call it a minor thesis. Some call it a capstone project. They are actually different from each other. In our case, for EEE, I will be honest, we have not really defined whether our project is a capstone or a minor thesis. Very loose pa yung definition niya. So we'll just call it the final year project. And then with the typical structure of the 190 proposal, and then we'll go into the review of related work. How do you actually conduct it? Okay. And then finally, how to write it up. Okay. So the major references for this is, as I mentioned, yung book by Paul Graba and Justice Zobel, How to Write a Better Minor Thesis. Justice Zobel is actually a computer scientist. So I particularly like this reference because of the fact that the author themselves come from a similar field as mine. Okay. And How to Read a Paper is also written by S. Keshav. For those of you who may be familiar with Keshav, he's the textbook author. He's the author of a computer networking book that we've been using for a textbook for a long time. Ayan. Okay. So the final year project, just to put it in context, I think you already know that there's a difference between the final year project and the typical assignments that you had during your 4-year stay in the university. So the format is very different. The length is also obviously very different. I doubt that you've had to write more than 6 pages of a lab report in such a structured way before. For a 190 proposal, if you're just a single person, that's typically at least 10 pages. If you have there's more of you in the group, we expect it to be longer. That 198 document definitely will also be longer as well. Okay. So it's not, as Sir Francis pointed out, it's not about the length, but the content. You just look at the length as a signal, I guess, of the extensiveness of the work. But sometimes it is obvious when pinapahaba lang siya for the sake of making it more lengthy. But it's really the objectives which are more different. And these objectives will define how you do your review of related work. Okay, so ang difference kasi with your individual projects or lab reports or essays or assignments in other previous courses is that we as teachers know what is the specific learning outcome that we want to get out of you. When we actually write your project specifications, be it programming or hardware, we already have a solution in mind. It is rare that we will write an open-ended specification that we as your teacher do not even know the solution for. That is actually quite reckless of us. Hindi dapat namin ginagawa yon. Okay, so dapat alam na namin. So we already know the end in mind and we just write the specifications around it. However, for your final year project, that's not the case. Okay, it's an open-ended investigation. It doesn't have to be research. When we say open-ended, it doesn't mean you don't know the answer. Okay, that's what exactly research is. It can be an industry problem. The difference is there are different viable options. The literature may show you, or your technical skills or your expertise will tell you, there are many different ways by which you could do it well. The question now is you need to make engineering decisions on which one you will choose for your project. So that is why it's open-ended. There's no one right answer for it. And that requires a higher level of insight, creativity at your end. Okay. Second is the driver of the project. For your typical undergraduate work, it's the teacher who drives the specifications, the implementation, and the results. Kasi nga, i-check namin siya. So, pipiliin na. There's not a lot of creativity. Very very heavily bound, tightly bound siya. But for your 198 project, that's not the case. It's you who makes the decision. You formulate, who chooses the topic, who formulates the specific question you want to answer about your topic, as well as the possible solution for it. Okay. So in order for you to do this, you need to display a higher level of maturity and ability than we typically require from your other undergraduate requirements. So it's actually exciting and at the same time quite formidable. So now would be a good time for you to ask what you want to get out of your project. I hope that you don't want, or you don't look at it as simply just a requirement that you need to get over with in order for you to get your degree. It's actually an opportunity for you to choose a topic and work on a project that is most meaningful for you. Sometimes it may be your 198 project that will make you realize why did you choose this program in the first place. Of course, I understand it's not for everyone. Hindi naman lahat magkakaroon ng epiphany at biglang mahalin nila yung kurso nila bigla na lang just because of the 198 project, but it's because of the fact that you are the driver for this. It is an opportunity for you to, and you should grab that opportunity to be able to choose what you want to work on for the rest of the year. It's not just for one sem, it's for the entire year. So medyo malaking investment yon. For most students, it will be because they want to work with industry. So maybe you might use this project to build on your practical skills or hone on a very specific set of skills which you think would be useful for your future industry. You may also use this as an opportunity to look at understand the work, the state of the art, for instance, that your particular target industry you may want to work with is currently working on. What do they find interesting? Develop soft skills. Okay, so before we encourage, well, ako personally, I encourage students to work in groups because it allows them to see how to manage other people, how to work with other people, okay, managing your time and syncing it with other people's time, that sort of thing. But we do recognize that now it may be a bit difficult given the pandemic. So it may be more prudent, perhaps because of the circumstances, to do it individually. But even then, it was one of the things that we used to encourage before. Okay. Now, for some students who may be interested with them, I'm not saying that all of you should do research, but for some who may be interested, they may prefer to do some research type work. So ito, mas open-ended talaga to. The problem will be is that the question that you're looking at, they may not have a very specific answer yet. Okay? But again, this is just an undergraduate project. Okay? This is dito thesis, hindi rin siya doctorate. But you could use this opportunity to see if you enjoy doing research. Maybe it may be something that may be of interest to you. You may also want to look this as an opportunity to understand what are the areas in your field, so to do a more in-depth study on it. And then finally, if for those who are interested to do a lot of experimentations, you might want to gain the appreciation of the different methods for experimentation. Very broadly, there are three kinds of experimental methods. The first is to run it via simulations. Okay, so actually at this point, mukhang mas preferred yon because of the reality of the situation. Or you can do experiments using actual hardware. So you develop a setup for that and do, hardware or yung actual implementation bali siya, hindi na siya simulated. And then finally, but this is not something that we require for undergraduate projects, we have mathematical modeling. Okay, so but that's typically for master's or even PhD level work. So typically for your project, it will be between simulation based or implementation based. Oops. Now, there's also a difference between the roles of the teacher and the student. Okay. Either you have to shift because of the difference in objective. There should be a shift as well on what you're expect, what me as your supervisor will expect from you, as well as you, what the student should expect from their supervisor. Okay. So for students, we expect that at this point, you already have some self-discipline to do the work on your own. You have the maturity and critical thinking to make decisions on your own. And more importantly, you need to have a strong awareness of the wider field. And that's the reason why you need to do the review of related work. You will not be able to determine or understand what the wider field is if you haven't done your homework, essentially. And because of you also need to work more systematically. Okay, kasi this is a project that you will do for 1 year, okay, 2 semesters. So you have to be systematic about it. And then more importantly, you have to be prepared. Okay, when you meet with your advisors, use this opportunity to seek insightful questions. You know, the questions which are not as easy to find the answer from just reading the books or the literature, and ask for guidance explicitly. Okay. Now, what should you expect from your supervisor? Actually, your supervisor or your advisor will work with you to find your research area and guide you as well on the related work that you may use. So typically, I will give them some pointers or for my own students, or give them reviews 1 and 8 documents, or even papers or good papers that we found on the topic, just to start them along. Okay. Your advisor will also help define your problem and objective, your tasks and milestones. It's typically the advisor who will gauge, pang 190 na ba to or pang 198? Masyado bang madali ito o masyadong mahirap? Okay. So ito yung crucial actually na part ng ginagawa ng mga advisor. Okay. So in particular, I have to ensure, it is also my duty as the advisor, to protect my student. I should know when the work is too large or the work is too much given yung objective ng project, and as well as the capability of the student. It may not be appropriate for a final year project. There are cases na parang 75% na to ng master's thesis, di ba? Parang gano'n. So parang hindi naman yun yung objective ng 198 project natin, di ba? There's a different objective for it. So you will really have to rely on your advisor on that. Okay. They will also guide you on how to actually conduct the study. Kung mukhang mali na yung methodology mo, they should be able to flag that. Pag mali din yung interpretation of results, they should be able to flag that. And your advisor will also be monitoring your progress. And most importantly, this is the main difference between 198 advisor and, well, me personally, and master's thesis advising and dissertation advising. I am also the examiner of your project. Okay. So for 190 and 198, I am not just helping you, I'm also going to grade you. Okay. I am also going to assess you. So we also have to always put that in context. Okay. So for the most part, there has to be a balance. Yun yung medyo pinagkaiba ng 198 project, 190 or 198 project. There has to be a balance between giving independence to the student, because we have to own the work. The student has to own the work, at the same time guiding them, okay? Giving them enough guidance so that they will be able to do the work to the best way possible. But not too much guidance that basically kulang na lang yung supervisor mo na yung gumawa ng work for you. Okay? So that is not acceptable, essentially. And you should not expect it to be the case. You should not expect that your supervisor will debug your code for you or interpret your results for you. So I mentioned already about project examination, and I think this is the most important part. Most students think of the project as really a report on the outcome of their work. Actually, it's not just that. It's not just you reporting on what you've done, but you using your 190 project and the document to demonstrate your ability as a student or as an engineer or as a researcher. Okay. So think about that again. If this is not just a lab report, that you're just reporting on what experiments you made, what the results that you had, but it is just as a way, the work itself is just a way for you to demonstrate that you have enough maturity, critical thinking, technical skills to graduate and be able to work independently as an engineer and as a researcher. You are basically ready to go in the outside world, and you have all the skills needed to make all those difficult engineering decisions. Now, if you think about it, you will have to then keep in mind that your project and your document is going to be examined. Okay. It's not just a descriptive narrative of what transpired. The document is going to be examined. So as pointed out by Sir Franz, we don't just present the results like, okay, the plot looks like this, the table shows like that. The more important question is, why? Why is your project important? Why did you choose this? Of course, understood na yun, you are interested in that. Pero you have to make it interesting and significant to others as well. You have to argue. Why did you use this particular method or technique? Why did you use this particular algorithm? Why did you choose this particular technique? Why did you design your experiments this way? What are the objectives of the experiment? And why are your results like that? This is the typical question I have with my students. They will present the results to me, and then when I ask them, do your results make sense? Does it jibe or coincide with your expected results based on your literature review? Yan ba dapat ang results na makikita ko? So, and always ask yourself, you have to be skeptical. Tama ba tong results na to? Even if the results seem to jibe with what your expectations are, you still have to be always skeptical about yourself. Sigurado ba wala akong mali dun sa setting? Walang bugs yung implementation ko, walang bugs yung code, walang defect. Just because it works now or it works once doesn't mean that it's correct. Okay? So you have to be very careful about that. And then finally, do your results support your conclusion? Okay, so sometimes hindi nag-jive yung conclusion dun sa results. So you may be be careful with how you frame your results, your conclusions based on on your results. So to answer all of these questions, so the question really is most that you will usually hear is why? Bakit ganyan yan? Okay. In order for you to be able to answer these questions convincingly, you will need to go to the literature review. In order for you to motivate the importance of your project, you will have to show that the literature, that there's a lot of work or there has been some work related to it. In order for you to justify the particular solution or algorithm you use, you have to show that that particular technique has worked before or shows promise. In order for you to convince your examiner that your results are correct, they have to jive. Okay, so your previous other works have also confirmed or affirmed that this is the expected behavior of such systems. Okay. So that is how important the related work is. So how do we now conduct the review of the related work? Okay. So typically, to start, you'll be a bit overwhelmed because there's so much information out there. So the first tip that I would suggest is to start first with a big picture and then narrow down your problem. For some students, their advisor may have already picked a very particular topic for them. So maybe in that case, okay lang na dumiretso na kayong mag-zoom in on those particular topic. But even then, for me personally, I still ask my students to look at the big picture first before they focus on a more particular problem. Bakit importante yun? Because if you understand the context of your problem, the environment that your problem or your system is going to work in, what are the limitations of that, ano yung typical applications nila, they will guide you later on and help you in justifying the engineering decisions that you need to make. For instance, I'll give a concrete example. I do some work with wireless sensor networks, and it's a very big field, okay, wireless sensor networks. So let's say I want my student to work on a sensor system for agriculture. Okay. So in this particular context, agriculture, nasa field. So isipin nyo, especially in the Philippine setting, pag pumunta ka ng probinsya, you won't expect LTE there. You won't expect 4G. Okay. Sometimes I've been to certain places in the Philippines where they only have GPRS, 2G pa, 2.5G pa rin sila. So if you understand that this is a limitation of your system, then it's unreasonable for you to expect to be able to send large amounts of data over the network. It was also unreasonable for you to expect that you're going to have power or power source 24/7. Okay, so that sort of thing will actually help you later on in making engineering decisions of how to place your system. Kasi this is the context that my system is going to work. So kailangan maliit yung bandwidth na i-consume niya. It can work even with a brownout. So there should be a way for my system to archive information first and then send it later on when power comes back, that sort of thing. So they're actually very important. Okay? So that's why it's important for you to see the forest for the trees first. You have to understand the big picture. So you will know how to place your solution in the right context. I've seen some work before wherein the final system is not applicable to the envisioned application. Okay? It's not going to work kasi hindi nag-match. Yung specs ng application, constrained siya sa ganito. Kunwari, constrained sa memory, sa processing, sa bandwidth, etc. And then yung solution nila, because of na-overlook nila yung aspect na yun, na may limitation pala yung system nila, hindi siya magiging applicable kaagad. Okay. So magkakaroon kaagad ng problem doon. Okay. So how do you get this seeing the forest for the trees? It's typically a good review or survey article. Okay. So if you are able to find a good survey paper for your work, you've hit the jackpot. Okay. You should pat yourself on the back and thank your lucky stars. or hopefully yung advisor nyo will give you a survey paper. I think EngLive has already gave you the before the orientation, but essentially there are survey sites. So you have the ACM, which has computing surveys. IEEE also has surveys. So basically, ano sila, mga journals sila which specializes on surveys. Okay, so they may be a good place to. Elsevier din pala. Ayan, meron din sila for surveys. Now, so that's the first tip that I can give to find a good survey or review paper of the field that you're working on. And then, based on that, a typical good, well-written survey paper will have at least 50 papers referenced in it. So you'll have to look at the body of knowledge. So there's going to be a lot. And after a while, you will realize na there are just a few works. So these are the major ones in maroon. And then, so these are basically the the key papers or the core papers of your field or your area of interest. And then there will be a number of works that are related to it, which builds upon these major works. Okay, so the key here is identifying those major works. How do we find them? There's no recipe for it. Typically, all of these are actually peer-reviewed, major or otherwise, Latvian peer-reviewed, but usually the major papers are the ones which have a higher citation score. And general rule of thumb lang to, we try to limit the search within 5 years. Kung umabot siya ng 10 years, medyo mag-iisip ka na. Pag more than 10 years pa yun, mag-iisip ka na talaga. So, ideally, it should be published within those time frames, especially for our field. I'm not sure. I think for EEE in general naman, so it's a fast evolving field. So 5 years is a good rule of thumb. Okay. Now, how do you conduct the RRW? Okay, so this may be a no-brainer, but sometimes some students overlook this part. Okay, they will just go to Google and then start searching already. There's actually hopefully a more systematic or better way for it. Google, how good it is not a it's not a mind reader. Okay, it's not a thesaurus by itself. So you will notice that searches will come up different results depending on the keyword you use. Sorry. So first of all, figure out the keywords or key terms or related terms in your field. Sometimes it may be a bit difficult, okay, kasi masyado siyang broad or masyadong narrow. So you will have to tweak that. Secondly, think of questions that you may want to answer when you conduct the search. Ano ba yung gusto mong malaman? Okay. And ideally, you should discuss your topic with your advisor first. Sometimes your advisor will give you keywords already. Okay. Pag nagsalita sila, may mga certain terms silang gagamitin, then most likely, to describe your project, then most likely those are the key terms that would best encapsulate your project. Now, after you choose those keywords or key terms, decide on the scope. How many studies do you want to look at overall? Or how many studies do you want to look at today? Okay, how comprehensive should it be? Is this, for this particular keyword, should I delve in it more deeply? Or is it's just a related term? Okay, I don't need it that much, but it may be useful later on, so it may not be as comprehensive. Okay. Yung how many years, it varies as I mentioned, but typically yun nga, 5 years yung magandang rule of thumb. Okay. It should be as updated as possible. Now, you select the databases. So that's the whole point why we have the NLIBE do the orientation, although we know that you know the NLIBE already, because you're now using the databases of the library that you may not have used before. So these are the typical suspects. You have IEEE Explore, for our field, the Association of Computing Machinery's Digital Library, ACMDL, Scopus. You also have ProQuest, or Google Scholar is also a good one, scholar.google.com. So yung first three will require you to log into the subscription service of the university. Google Scholar is free. Archive.org is relatively new. It's for preprints. Some of the good works are here. Those who are not yet published are here. So you may need to be careful, but it's actually to a certain extent reviewed already. Okay, yung archive.org na to. And then you can ask your advisor if there may be previous related works in your lab, thesis or 198 projects. And of course, you may have books. Okay? Although now we've noticed na medyo rare na ginagamit yung books as a reference for students. Okay. And as mentioned by Sir Franz, you may need to select the referencing tool as well. Try to be as systematic as possible. Hindi naman to required, but I would say it may be good for you to think about it first. The free one is Zotero. We have the licensed one yung sa through the NLIBE yung Mendeley. Okay, the reference manager will help you keep track of your references and help you a lot when you write your RRW later on. Next is you finally conduct your search. Okay, so you will see na medyo may 3 steps pa muna before you pull up your browser and you actually conduct the search. Now, how do you read the papers? Okay. I espouse the use of the 3-pass approach, okay, by Kishab. And then after that, you do the reference searching. So ano ba yung 3-pass approach na to? The paper is up in Oble already. The first pass, most of the papers will just be for the first pass. The first pass will give you a general idea about the paper. The second pass will allow you to grasp the content. And then the third pass will allow you to understand the paper in depth. Now, not all works will go through the second pass or the third pass. So, as you can see here, visually, mas marami yung first pass, and then once you filtered it out, you do the second pass, and then once you filtered it out, you do the third pass. Sorry. Ayan. So, ano ba yung passes na to? The first pass is about 10 to 15 minutes only. So, sabihin mo, bakit naman maiksi lang siya? Because of the sheer volume of works out there, you have to filter them out. So these are the things that you need to read only. The title, the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusion. Ako personally, I skip the section and subsection. I only do the title, abstract, introduction, and conclusion. Okay. Later ko na, kung mukhang may sense yung paper or mukhang related yung paper na yon, doon ko lang tinitingnan yung section and subsection headings. Now, why do we just go to that? Why do we only look at that? Because if the paper is written well, you will be able to answer the 5 C's just by reading the abstract, introduction, and conclusion. First, the category. Is this, what type of paper is this? Is this an implementation paper? Is it a review? Is it a survey paper? Is it a comparison or historical account of the technology or the research area? Is it a simulation paper, etc., etc. Yun yung category niya. You will also be able to determine the context. Okay? And under what context is this, yung particular application, okay, and target audience that the paper is looking at. Okay? It is targeted pala. The next is, medyo mahirap to at this point, pero sometimes, as you become more mature, yung correctness, contribution ng work. At this point, it may be a bit difficult for you to ascertain how correct or how significant the contribution is, but after a while, medyo mapi-filter out mo na. Okay, ay, ito, ano to? Well, medyo problematic tong paper na to. Parang may problema yung methodology niya. Mukhang hindi tama ginawa nila. Ito naman, yung paper na to, medyo little contribution lang. This is very similar to 80 other works I've read before. Okay. And then finally, clarity. Okay, we mentioned this before, yung readability and clarity. Why is this important? Kasi, let's just be realistic. With the thousands, literally hundreds or thousands of work out there, ba't mo papahirapan yung sarili mo magbasa ng paper na hindi mo maintindihan? Diba? So, kaya nga, you want to get a bird's eye view. So there may be other papers out there which may give you the bird's eye view better. Okay. Of course, there are seminal works which may be more difficult, sometimes, especially for sometimes a field of computer science or where you have mathematical models na very mathematical siya. So ang hirap mo talaga intindihin, very technical. So it may be better for you to look at other papers first just to get the clarity and then go back to that one once you have the background for it. Okay. So yun yung idea ng first pass. When you have already the proper background for it, then perhaps it will be easier for you to understand the paper dun sa second and third pass. And then finally, the most important part will help you decide. Babasahin ko ba to or hindi? Okay, move on na. Okay, go to the next paper. So next, the second pass. Nasira yung ano niya. So yung first pass will be for quite a number of papers. The second pass is for, second pass is for those who pass the first pass, obviously. And then the second pass will be about 60 minutes. So since nabasa mo na yung mga introduction and conclusion, you may look at the results already, the figures, the diagrams, and other illustrations in the paper. So that's how important the figures and the diagrams are. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So kung maganda yung pagkasulat ng paper, just by looking at the figures and the diagrams, maintindihan mo na siya. Okay. You may actually understand it even more rather than just reading through the text. Okay. So, but at this point, you will be able to understand the methodology already and what is the main thrust, okay, and explain it to someone else. Now, finally, for those really important papers, yun yung mag-third pass ka na. Because of the fact that this third pass will allow you to virtually re-implement the work, this will take much longer. And again, only a few, not all the papers that you've encountered is deserving of a third pass. So you will have to look at the entire paper. You may have to reread it multiple times and then to identify ano ba yung assumptions ng paper na to that the author made. So that will determine also the scope and the limitations of the work, how significant are the contributions, and then what may be problems with it. What were the certain issues or assumptions that may not align with my own work. Okay. So magiging issue yun later on. So these papers will, in most cases, be called your anchor, core, or key papers kasi these papers will become the foundations of your own work. Okay. So just like what I did with this slide, I identified 2 anchor references, yung how to read the paper and the 3-pass approach. If I didn't read these papers or these references in much detail, I will not be able to actually conduct this talk. In the same manner, ganun din yung sa literature review nyo. Your anchor, core, or key papers are those papers on which your own work will be based heavily upon. Now, once you've identified those key papers, you need to do a reference search now. So, ano ba yung reference search na to? First, you look at the backward reference. Yung backward reference is you look at the reference section. So, yung key paper na yun will obviously have a list of references at the end of it. So, you look at the list of references and mentally pick mo ano yung nabasa mo doon. From the title, ano yung mukhang related doon sa work mo. Now, why is this important? Because of the fact that this is a key paper, most likely, yung i-reference niyang material ng paper na yun would also be related to your work. Diba? Medyo obvious naman siya. So, you can look at the references as a way for you to look at other key materials that may explain better how did the knowledge develop, where did the theory come from, how did the technique progress, ano yung mga conceptual foundations nun, okay? And additionally, if you may notice sometimes that there are certain people or institutions that are being cited again and again, you will be able to identify people who are working on the same area or field, and then sometimes yung i-Google stalk ko siya. So you look them up, Google their name, Google their affiliation, hanapin mo, and then you will see from their personal website kung ano na yung mga works nila. Sometimes, they post code there. Okay? So, kung may code yun, mag-ano ka na, magbunyi ka na. At least, there's the prior work and the prior implementation are already posted up there. So, sometimes yung mga data sets are posted there, etc. Okay? So, that's how important it is. Then, after that, especially if the paper has been published for more than a few years, you do a forward reference search. Most searches like Google search, Scopus will have a cited by. So these are the papers that cited your key paper. And why are they important? Again, the fact that they were cited means that they are related. Okay, hindi naman siya isa-cite kung hindi related yung work na ginagawa nila dun sa key paper mo. So, by doing a forward reference search, that actually updates your reference list very quickly. Okay, so follow-up studies, if there may be new findings or contributions already, or other works that build upon this. Okay. So typically, yung forward reference search, I require this for my students when they do their 198 document na. Kasi mga halos more than 6 months na yung dumaan. So I'll ask them, update your reference list kasi there may be other published works already. So you need to do this forward reference. That is the quickest way for you to update your reference list. Okay. Then finally, you write down, you review the literature, which is the most important part. So how do you do that? Okay. After, this is the critical aspect. After reading all of that, you will have an understanding what were the questions that they are trying to answer. Okay. What were the authors trying to discover? What are they so interested about it? Ano yung mga methods and algorithms that they use? Is the work already complete? In other words, has the problem been solved satisfactorily? Or are there still some open questions? If there are conflicting results, why do you think there are conflicting results? Okay. So again, in order for you to do this, usually a well-written paper will already specify the answers to this or give you hints to the answers to this from the abstract alone. And then try to keep careful notes. It may help if you do a mind map. Okay, I won't go through that in detail. You can just Google it. But mind map is a visual tool that will allow you to organize your thoughts. Now, how do you actually write the RRW? This is the typical outline of the proposal. If you haven't asked your advisor already, you may want to request for a copy of a previous 190 proposal in the lab, or if you have friends, tanongin mo sila ano ba yung itsura ng proposal nyo. But this is the template, and almost all 190 proposals will follow this outline. You have the introduction, the related work. The third part will be the problem statement objectives. Then you have the methodology chapter. And then the last chapter will be the project schedule and deliverables. Okay. So typically, as we mentioned kanina ni Sir Franz, when you do your 198, the first 4 will be more or less the same unless there was major revision to your work. Para malalaman namin na hindi siya na-update kasi the tense is still future. Okay, so dapat by the time you finish your 198 project, it should be past tense already or present tense. Okay. Definitely hindi future kasi tapos na yung work. Okay? But as you can see here, the related work is the second chapter and it comes before the problem statement and objectives and the methodology. So bakit siya ganon? Because essentially, the work of the related work chapter is to set up the stage, okay, for your reader or your examiner to understand the context of your work and anticipate ano yung magiging outcome nito, ano ba yung ina-expect kong results nito, and how will the outcome relate to the current knowledge in the field. Okay. So the key thing here is when you write your related work, it is to make obvious. By the time your reader goes to the chapter 3, problem statement and objectives, obvious na sa kanya kung ano yung problem mo, bakit importante yung problem mo, and ano ba yung gusto mong ma-achieve sa project na to. Okay. So, it's, again, it sets up the stage. It should flow naturally. Sometimes, this may be a typical an issue with certain documents or proposals, parang hindi related. Parang after mong basahin yung introduction tsaka related work, even me as examiner, nagugulat ako, bakit naging ganito yung problem statement tsaka objective niya? Parang hindi connect. Parang kulang yung connection. So yun yung goal mo talaga. It should be obvious. Kumbaga pagdating ng chapter 3, stating the obvious na siya. Okay. Ano yung context ng work mo. So that's essentially the function of the RRW, to provide the context for the work and explain your work in relation to the field. Now again, this has nothing to do with research, even if this is an implementation project, hindi siya research project. it's still important. It's still the same thing. Okay? What is the context of the work? What is the significance of the work? Why did you choose these particular solutions, etc. So ito yung typical elements ng RRW: establishment of context, identification of the current theory or discoveries or innovations, the state of the art, current practices and technologies, how it may have evolved over the years, and ideally the state of the art right now, the state of the technology right now, and similar work undertaken by others in the lab or in the area. So ang basic idea nito is, you think about it, pag sinabi ko sa inyo ngayon pa lang, okay, next year, magkakaroon ng part 2 yung project ninyo ha. Magre-recruit na ako ng mga 190 students for next academic year to finish or to follow up your work. So isipin mo, ano ba yung information na kailangan ng students na yon will follow in my footsteps para maintindihan nila yung work ko, and B, they can build on top of my work. So, parang if you put it in that context, mas maging clear ano ba yung elements na kailangan mong ilagay dun sa RRW. In a lot of cases, not in all, but in a lot of cases, we do have follow-up studies for our 190 and 198 projects. So we do use the documentation and pass it on to previous students and pass it on to other students for them to build upon. So sometimes yung iba related lang talaga siya, so we give it to them para magkaroon sila ng idea. Okay. So how do you write the related work? It's not supposed to be a laundry list of all the papers you've read. It's also not supposed to showcase na, okay, nakabasa na ako ng 100 papers. That's not the idea. Again, it's a higher level of critical thinking. So, ano yung mga tips to determine what to include and what to omit? Please, do not include the work that is not needed for your reader to understand. There is no point in making your document seem longer than it needs to be. Okay. So kung hindi naman siya kailangan para maintindihan nila yung work mo, wag mo nang ilagay doon. Kahit na parang, ay sayang naman, binasa ko 100 papers, tapos hindi siya malalagay kasi nag-iba na yung focus ng topic ko. So don't think about that way. Okay. This was actually asked earlier on. If this has been something that has been covered extensively in your coursework, then don't put it in the reference anymore. And then, if it interrupts the flow or logic of your story. Remember that writing, whether it's technical writing, even if it's technical writing, is supposed to tell a story. Okay? Meron siyang story. It's readability, kaya yung readability is very important because it's difficult to tell a story if there is no seeming logic or connectiveness, okay, between the works, essentially. So what you need to include, those things which are really necessary for your mini-me to understand later on, which provide fresh and genuinely useful information, and those who makes obvious how important your work is. So you need to develop critical thinking, essentially. I guess that's the key thing here, as I've said earlier. That's the main difference between a 198 and your other requirements. You need to to think critically, look at the methodology, are they sound? Look at the results, are they sound? Are the conclusions sound as well? Even though it's peer-reviewed, you may know already that not all papers are equal. There are good papers, there are not so good papers, and there are plain bad, outright bad papers. So you still have to be skeptical, and you still have to be critical, even if the paper is claims to have been peer-reviewed. For the most part talaga, There's most of the papers are incremental contributions, but there's relatively few which are genuinely remarkable, or ano talaga siya, moves the field forward so much. And for those of you, or some of you, writing while reading may help. So other contents of RRW, conceptual framework, typical contents to, if you are working on a very particular field or perspective, then you may need to put in a conceptual framework. Okay. For more common methods or approaches, okay, for engineering, ito yung mas common na content ng RRW, typical techniques used by others, what are the known solutions to them, what are the performance metrics that we use, how do they stack up against each other, yung mga different solutions na to based on sa performance metrics. And keep in mind, again, that there is no single perfect bullet. Okay? There's no perfect solution that will solve everything. Okay? If things could have been that simple sana, then all the problems of this world would have been solved already. So your typical challenge is to identify what are the strengths, limitations, or weaknesses of each solution. Yung solution na to, is it perfectly adaptable to my particular application or to my particular scenario or context, etc. Okay. Sometimes, but this is not common for engineering, there may be conflicting schools of thoughts about how to solve a particular matter. Okay, so sometimes it may be a question of methodology. What is the correct way for collecting data? What is the correct way to interpret the results, etc. But this is quite rare for our field. Okay? For some field like mga social sciences, and for some other certain fields, there may be some open debates on these particular aspects. Okay, so some final words. I guess it's really about the change of attitude. It may be it is going to be very different from how you conducted your other works, but it's important for you to be independent, especially at these particular times. You need to be resilient and productive. And ito siguro yung pinaka-challenging part, given the particular circumstances, working at a sustained high level of activity. Okay. So typically kasi for EEE, well, not just for EEE, but for most students, if I'm going to plot the level of activity, parang ganyan lang siya, and then mid-sem ink, tapos ganyan ulit, and then finals, mga 1 month before finals yung ink. So parang, ano siya, may highs and lows. So for your 198, 190 and 198, it's a relatively higher level of activity, not as high as finals week, especially if you don't want to stress yourself too much. So it's better for you to work consistently. Okay. Again, it's 2 semesters. You have to love your topic so much, because you're going to live with it for the next 7 months. Ayan. So you need to be able to sustain your interest over that period of time in order for you to keep working at a high level of activity as well. So I will end here. Sorry, are there any questions? The list of references pala are at the end of the slides. So if you have any questions, you can just post them in the chat box. How many related works ang kailangan? It's a bit difficult to put a specific number, especially because kung mag-isa ka lang or group kayo, okay, medyo mahirap i-calculate. But in general, we would expect at least 10 or 20 references ideally. Okay. Mga 20 references siguro ideally per project yon. And then pag mas maraming students, there's no like, linear equation for it. Maybe a bit more. But there are some certain topics talaga which ako personally na-encounter ko na rin with my own students. Sobrang konti talaga yung related work. So hirap na hirap kaming maghanap. So it's not a hard and fast rule. But if you could put in at least 20 papers, yun nga, parang magic number siya. Sorry wala talaga kasing hard and fast rule eh. At least 20 papers, medyo mukhang enough na siya. Okay. The important thing is, medyo extensive naman siya. It's more about the extent. Kasi, for instance, kung meron isang paper lang that summarizes everything, diba? You find a very good review paper na swak talaga daw sa work mo. Eh, di pag sinireference mo yung review paper na yun na. So, pero medyo mahirap din yun eh. So, even I would suggest na if you get that review paper, you go through the reference list of that review paper, pick out the most important ones, and then you have to go, yung backward reference search, you have to go and read them up, the review, yung paper na yon na ni-reference na review paper mo. Kasi sometimes, from the review paper, malalaman mo na kung ano yung work na yun eh. But it may not be enough. So you still have to look up the paper in order for you to be able to reference them. Yeah. Which is better, conference paper or journals? Again, there is no hard and fast rule. Kasi it's very field specific. There are certain fields wherein the best papers are still in journals, but there are certain fields wherein the field is so highly evolving that the conference paper will have a better citation. So how do we quantify this? Sometimes we use the citation score, yung minention ko kanina. When you go to Google, you will see the number of papers which cited one. Okay, that's one. So it doesn't matter if it's a conference or a journal. Okay, the fact that it was a high citation score, that means very important yon. Second is, if you want to be nitty-gritty about it, there is actually a Google Scholar. We have what we call as the H5 index. So when you go to conference.google.com, I'll try to do it now. But yeah, when you search for a particular field, makikita mo doon, based on the H5 index, what the ranking is for that particular field. For most fields, it's a journal which are highly ranked. For other fields, it's the conferences. Okay. Ako personally, wala naman akong preference. I would, in most cases, students, especially undergraduate students, would use conference papers because they are more readable. Yung journals kasi, especially yung mga older journal papers, the level of contribution is higher. So, in most cases, mas highly mathematical siya, nahirapan intindihin ng mga students. Okay. So medyo balance din siya. Ayan. I guess the important thing is kung it's not about how targeting a particular journal or conference, pero parang looking at the work based on its own merits. Okay. And then second na lang kung conference ba siya or journal. Next question, ipopost ba yung slides? Yeah, I posted the slides in Uble already this morning. Pati yung slides ni Sir Franz, nasa Uble na din. Any other questions? Sorry. So, I'll try to, last na lang, kasi nagtanong kayo, this is how, sa Google Scholar, Ay, sorry. Okay, I'm trying to find. Medyo mahirap kasi siyang hanapin. Ayun. Yan. Ay, sorry, hindi ko pala na-share. Okay, so I'll share this. This is what I mentioned about Google Scholar. Yan. So the scholar.google.com, okay, citations. Okay. Ano na kasi siya eh. So ayan, these are the top publications. This is what I mentioned about the H5 index. So when you click categories and you go to engineering, computer science, you will see here, for instance, for engineering and computer science in general, the highest ranking is a conference. 299 yung H5 index niya. Advanced materials is actually a journal. And then you have another conference. And then I think this one is a journal as well. So depende siya per field. Okay, so and if you type here, let's say, computer networks. Ayan. So, papakita niya. Okay, pero this is more of ano eh, the search is more of a title search. Parang hindi siya keyword or field search eh, or area search. So as for computer networks, the topmost is JNCA. You see it's a journal. Computer networks is also a journal. Okay, so the top two references are these two journals. And then you have the conference. Next na are the conferences. The conference on computer communications. Ayan. Pero hindi siya, the search kasi is not very good at, I guess, searching. Kasi dapat per field yung pag-search niya eh. Okay, so dito, meron to before, I forgot how to do it. But there's a way for you to do to refine it even more by subcategories pa. Okay. So, yeah, this is something that may be useful for you to determine which are the top rank conferences or publication venues more of for your particular area of research. Okay, so ano siya, scholar.google.com. I forgot how to go to this. I'll try to mag-post na lang siguro ako ng link doon sa Uble. Okay, kasi medyo hindi siya ganoon ka-straightforward hanapin. Okay, yung particular na part na to. Okay. So other questions, wait lang. Okay, we'll try to wrap up in a few minutes. Wala na yata ibang questions. Are there other questions pa? Mukhang wala naman. So yeah, I think we can end here. Okay, again, thank you very much for participating and for coming, even though classes has been suspended, and we hope that these talks will help guide you in understanding what your final project is, what are the objectives of that, and it also help you to write it and put you in the right mindset when you're actually implementing and writing your work. Okay, so thank you everyone. Thank you also Michelle for hosting the event. And then, next week pala, I forgot. Next week, if you may notice in Uble, medyo kakaiba yung schedule. It's because our speaker, the first talk is in the morning, 10 to 11 a.m. Again, this is on, ano na siya, not required. These are the optional talks. So if you look at the schedule, we already have some of the topics finalized already. But for next week, we have two talks. The first talk is at 10 a.m. The second talk is at 1:30. I know it's a different time slot. Ang issue kasi is that the speaker is from the US. He's based in Maryland, and there's a 12-hour time difference. So yung 1:30 p.m. sa atin is 1:30 a.m. na sa kanya. So he's a very good speaker. He's been with he's been at EEE before as a visiting professor, and he's going to give a talk on the difference between between the different programs, undergraduate, master's, and a PhD. Okay, so that's why it's at 10 a.m. So if you could attend the talk, that will be great. But we understand if you have classes. And then the second talk will be at 1:30 on LaTeX naman. Okay, LaTeX. Paano, how to use it and the tools that you can use for that. So just to very quickly give you a schedule. Ano nangyari dito? Ay, sorry. We have only 2 topics are not yet there. Eh. Yan. So nasa uble na to. So yan, for October 5, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. yung first talk. Next talk is 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. for LaTeX. And then October 12, we have Stamina for Space by Sir Mark. We're still looking for another speaker. Hopefully, we'll be able to get one for 2:30 to 3:30. And then for October 19, we have two talks as well. Ayan. The first one is on Samsung, okay, R&D. The second one is about entrepreneurship. So the speaker who is coming from is based in Melbourne now, but he had a startup in water. He's an ECE graduate. Okay, so he's going to share his experiences on the startup of Hiraya Water. And then the last talk for is again another company talk. It's by Rhodette on Artisan. So for medyo parang pang-ECE yung speakers namin. We're trying to organize get a speaker for the power group for the EE students. Wala kasing EE na handler ngayon eh. But we're trying hard to get a speaker for EE. And then yun yung isang talk na target pa namin. And then the other talk will be a soft skills like leadership or professionalism. So we're still trying to get a speaker for that. Okay. So anyway, just check the course schedule periodically kasi ina-update namin siya once nagko-confirm yung mga speakers namin. Okay? So yeah, that's it for now. And again, thank you everyone. I will let you know once the recording is available already. So thank you and stay safe.